Hello, government students. Mr. V coming here today to talk to you about the Electoral College, specifically how we elect the President of the United States. Now, many of you may be fairly aware of how this system works merely because we've just gone through an election cycle where the Electoral College played a very large role in what actually occurred. But it is part of the Constitution, and it is part of specifically Article 2 of the Constitution. And most Americans really don't understand the process. Especially, and I hate being this way, but all the people that crashed through the windows and the doors of the Capitol building on January 6th, they did not understand how this system works. It's so vital for Americans to truly understand how the system works. Even just 4 years ago, when Donald Trump won, many Democrats didn't understand that, yes, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but she did not win the Electoral College. So it's really not a partisan thing. It's something where all Americans really need to understand the process in order to really gain an understanding of how a president achieves the election of to the position of the president. So we're going to briefly kind of go through how this whole system works. The Electoral College is constitutional, and it was one of the constitutional, shall we say, constitutional compromises. Sorry, I'm a little out of it today. So constitutional compromises are, pretty standard. There was the 3/5 compromise, where they compromised that every slave, every African American in the South would count as 3/5 of a man. So 3 out of every 5 slaves would count for both taxation and for representation purposes. There was the compromise over representation in Congress, where the Senate was going to be based upon equality, 2 per state, and the House was going to be based on population. So there are numerous compromises all throughout the document, but one of the main ones was the Electoral College. And it's in Article 2, which, remember, Article 2 is the executive branch of the presidency. Article 1 we've already gone through in the previous unit, and that was the legislative branch. We will be moving on to Article 3, the judicial branch, here in a couple of weeks. But in sections 1 through 4 of Article 2, they lay out how the Electoral College works. Now, the Electoral College has had some fine-tuning over the years. It was fine-tuned by Amendment 12. Remember, we kind of went over the Electoral College when we talked about Amendment 12. Amendment 12 was the idea that the presidency runs in conjunction with a vice president. So when you voted for Donald Trump, you got Mike Pence as part of the deal. When you voted for Joe Biden, you got Kamala Harris as part of the deal. You would not have a situation where, Joe Biden would win the presidency, but Mike Pence would be the vice president. That you can't split those votes because of the 12th Amendment. And that was all because of a problem when Thomas Jefferson was elected to the presidency. Aaron Burr got the same amount of votes, and so therefore the vice presidential candidate challenged the presidency and said, hey, we both got the same amount of votes, therefore I must be president, or at least be considered for the presidency. The 12th Amendment closed that and made it to where, hey, when you're running for a specific office, that is the only office that you are running for, and you're running in conjunction with a running mate. So they are linked together because of that. That's the fine-tuning that has happened. But this has become kind of a bone of contention for both Democrats and Republicans, that the Electoral College system might need to be tweaked again, or there are a number of people out there saying, hey, we need to get rid of it altogether. But there's a reason why it was put in. James Madison, of course, was the architect of most of the Constitution. He's the father of the Constitution. He's pictured here. He had an argument with the smaller states, and Madison was from Virginia. Virginia was the most populous state at the time of the early republic. So not surprisingly, Madison was totally fine with everything being based on a popular vote. Other states said, especially the smaller states, states like New Hampshire, states like New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, they were a little concerned that they were going to be dominated by states like New York and Virginia and Massachusetts. So they came up with a kind of compromise here where they said each state should hold their own separate ballot. They should have their own separate vote, if you will, within their states to who they feel their states should elect to the presidency. So instead of having a big, huge, popular vote, we're just going to break it up to where each state holds their own popular vote, and then they award electors to an electoral college based upon their state's outcome. Now, that eventually became known as the Electoral College. Now, why not the popular vote? Again, the smaller states were worried that the bigger states would dominate not just who they wanted for the presidency, but also in presidential representation. They were worried that, in order to win the presidency, you had to have a popular vote advantage, and the popular vote advantage was definitely in the bigger states, the Pennsylvanias, the New Yorks, the Virginias, the Massachusetts. And they feared that every president would always come from those states because they're starting off with kind of a head start, if you will. And somebody from New Hampshire could never be elected president because they just had such a small part of the electorate. So they were kind of hoping that maybe that would, even things out to where the presidents would not just come from specific states, and the presidential candidates would actually have to kind of campaign all throughout the country and convince each state that they were the right person for the job, which is kind of how that's worked out, because we'll get to it here in a bit. There are certain states that usually you wouldn't pay that much attention to because of their population, but they get attention because they are what is known as a swing state and very vital in a very close election cycle. This will make more sense when I bring up a map here in a few minutes. Why not the popular vote again? Again, it's the idea that if we have everybody vote collectively, and let's bring it up to modern day terms, wouldn't it be possible that most presidential candidates would come from the bigger states like Texas, California, New York, Florida, because they're already getting a head start in the fact that they are from the more populous states, and theoretically those states might vote for them as a favorite son candidate. You're probably not going to get too many candidates from, let's say, Arkansas, where Bill Clinton is from. You would just have the George W. Bushes from Texas, the Barack Obamas from Illinois, Donald Trump is from New York. Joe Biden's from Delaware. Would Joe Biden really get a head start in presidential politics by being from a smaller state like that? The argument may be no. So the Electoral College kind of allows for candidates to come from these smaller states. So that's kind of why they did it, at least initially. And again, the constitutional makeup of the college is the House membership, which is currently 435 members, so 435. The Senate membership, which is currently 100, so 435 plus 100 is 535 total members of Congress, plus 3 votes for the District of Columbia, thanks to the 23rd Amendment. The 23rd Amendment added those 3 Electoral College votes onto the Electoral College count, which equals 538 total representatives within the Electoral College. Now, this does not mean that the actual House members and the actual senators are the ones making these votes. In reality, it's a slate of people that are selected by the Republicans or the Democrats, that if the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate win those states, they get their slate of electors to show up about a month and a half after the election in mid-December, usually around December 20th, to register their votes, to actually vote in the Electoral College. This gives the states long enough to count and officially certify their votes. And you noticed in certain states like Georgia, it took a little bit longer for them to certify their votes. Pennsylvania, the states that people like Rudolph Giuliani were kind of bringing up as like, oh, well, there are problems with the counting or the voting or the machines or whatever else, all the different things that the Trump campaign tried to bring up as being faulty or fraudulent. The states still certified their election returns well before the Electoral College met. So when the Electoral College met, for example, when the electors met in Atlanta, the state capital, to officially tender their votes, it was a group of Democrats. They showed up. They were going to vote for Joe Biden. And that's where this idea of a faithless elector comes along. The faithless elector is the idea that somebody shows up and says, I'm supposed to vote for Biden, but I'd much rather vote for Trump. That rarely happens, and most states have in their state constitutions rules against that. Some states don't, but the chances of somebody in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party deciding to vote for the other person and being a faithless elector is very slim, because these are lifelong Republicans and Democrats who usually get the honor of being part of the Electoral College. Needless to say, 538 members show up and vote. Now, how do we determine this? Half of 538 is 269. So if the Electoral College ends at 269 versus 269, nobody wins. Now, what happens in that instance, according to the Constitution? If nobody wins the Electoral College, if nobody can get to 270, which is 269 plus 1, so just over 50% of the vote, If nobody gets that magic number of 270 to win, that's why they say it. If nobody gets it, it goes to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives meets as a body of the whole, and they vote one vote per state, which means there are 18 members of the Ohio Electoral College. That means that there are 18 members of the Ohio Senate and House membership. Those 18 members would meet and they would discuss and they would decide collectively who would get that one vote for the state of Ohio, who Ohio would vote for. Now, in the state of Ohio, this past election cycle, we voted for Donald Trump. So therefore, it wouldn't change all that much because most of the people who are in Congress, most of the people who are representatives are Republican in the state of Ohio. Most of the people in the House are Republican, and we are split 1-1 in the Senate right now. We have a Democrat and a Republican, Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman, respectively. Rob Portman, by the way, just announced that he is not running for re-election in 2 years. So there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position amongst the Republicans and Democrats of who will run for that statewide office in just 2 years, 2 short years from now. So immediately, the next election cycle has already started. So for those of you that were hoping to kind of get a break, it ramps right back up again. And you'll see here in a second that they've already started talking about 2024. So even the presidential politics have already started as well. So needless to say, 270 is the vote that you have to get in order to win the Electoral College. Now, it is a winner-take-all system in 48 of the 50 states. The winner gets all of the states' votes. So you can win Ohio, the popular vote in Ohio, by one vote and still get all 18 electors. They don't split it up. The only 2 states where they do that are Maine and Nebraska because they have decided that they will allow their 2 Senate picks to be decided by the whole state, but that their House districts will vote individually. So what that means is let's say Joe Biden wins the state of Maine, and this happened this time. Joe Biden wins the state of Maine, but one of the congressional districts votes for Donald Trump. That means Joe Biden would get the 4 votes from Maine, where he won the 2 congressional districts, and then the state as a whole, he would get the 2 districts and the 2 senators, so he'd get 4 votes, but that 5th vote would actually go to Donald Trump. Same thing happened in Nebraska this time, just the opposite, where Donald Trump won the state of Nebraska, but he lost one of the districts. So therefore, one of the districts, and I got that backwards. Maine has 4 votes, Nebraska has 5. So it'll make more sense when I'm on the map. So my apologies. But again, what happens if no one gets to 270? I already kind of talked about this. It goes to the House of Representatives. What happens if you win the Electoral College but lose the popular vote? Well, this has happened numerous times in American history, and quite recently it has happened twice. Donald Trump never won the popular vote. He lost the popular vote both times in 2016 and 2020. But it doesn't matter. It's the Electoral College that matters. The previous time that this happened was in the year 2000 when Al Gore won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College. Okay, and it came down to literally one state, Florida. Okay, so that was what I thought was going to be the craziest election cycle of my lifetime. It has since been beaten out by 2016 and 2020. So, we've had kind of some interesting elections here recently. This is not normal in American history. Most elections are pretty well in hand, or, if they're close, you still kind of understand who won and how they won and whatever else. The last 2 have been kind of different, to say the least. Okay. Now, current state allocations, you'll notice there are 8 states that have 3 votes, which means they have the bare minimum. They have 2 senators and 1 elected official. And keep in mind, one of that is D.C., which gets the same amount as the lowest represented states. And these are the lowest represented states: Alaska, Delaware, District of Columbia, of course, D.C., Montana, North and South Dakota, Vermont, and Wyoming. Okay, as you can see, these are the states that are the least populous. So they get the smallest amount. The biggest is California. California has 55 Electoral College votes. Now, we just had a census. The census will be reported here in the next few months. When the census comes in, they will do what is known as reallocation. They will basically reallocate the amount of votes per state, meaning they're going to come back and say, Ohio, in the past 10 years, because remember the census is every 10 years, they're going to say, Ohio, you actually dropped in overall population comparative to the rest of the United States to where you are only a certain percentage of the U.S. population, which is less. We have been dropping, Ohio has been dropping in population, so we may lose 1, even 2 House seats. So what they're going to say is instead of having 16, they're going to say maybe 14 House seats moving forward. Now, once they reallocate that and they tell the state of Ohio you only have 14 now, they have to do what is known as redistricting. When they do redistricting, they're going to redraw the district lines to suit the needs of the state. They're going to basically sit down on a map and redraw the district lines to where the population is basically divvied up into 14 in that regard, somewhat equal population groupings. Okay. Now, this has been a very controversial thing in the past because sometimes you have people in the government that redraw the district lines for advantageous district lines for one political party. That is known as gerrymandering, when you redraw the district lines to benefit a political party. Okay. Ohio has been somewhat gerrymandered. We are considerably, not necessarily a 50-50 state when it comes to Republican Democrat. There is a Republican majority in the state, but not to the point where out of 16 House districts, I think the last time I looked at it, is 12 or 13 of the House districts are all Republican. Okay. That's a little too one-sided. So obviously the last time they drew the district lines back in 2010, it was a little advantageous to the Republicans. The state of Ohio fixed that, at least we hope, by coming up with a panel of Democrats and Republicans that will sit down in a conference room and redraw the map based upon data. So we're hoping that maybe that makes it a little bit more equitable. We'll see moving forward. Again, the state is a little bit more leaning Republican based on the ease to which Donald Trump won re-election. But we do have we do have a Democratic senator in Sherrod Brown who won fairly comfortably a few years ago. So we tend to be kind of one of those swing states that we'll talk about here in a bit. And as you can see, Ohio, we have 18. The last time we lost 2 seats. So we lost 2 seats in 2010. We might lose more. Okay, we might lose a few more. Everybody at least will have 2 plus 1, 3. 3 is the lowest you can get because you have at least 1 House member and you always have 2 senators. So 3 will always be the lowest number you can get. Some of these states are going to grow. Arizona is currently growing. They have 11 Electoral College votes. They may grow. There are some of the states in the Sun Belt that you keep hearing about here and there. The Sun Belt are places like Alabama, Mississippi, places like Louisiana, and then out west, places like New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona. They're the ones that tend to grow and add on. And they're expected, quite honestly, to gain the Ohio. The ones that are lost by Ohio will be gained by places like Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, places like that. So again, you notice all these little plus and minus signs. That's who gained and who lost seats. Okay. And of course, one of the more controversial states this last time around was Georgia. Georgia is not only growing in population, obviously it's growing in population and turning a little bit more Democrat, which was concerning to the Republican Party because Georgia has always been pretty solidly Republican. The last time any Democrat won the state was Bill Clinton back in 1992, and that was close. So again, current state allocations are this right now, but this is bound to change with the new reallocation coming from the census this year. Okay, it's of course been slowed by COVID. Now, the Electoral College map, in case you've never seen one, on election night, this is typically how it looks. Okay, now in the 2000 election cycle, you can see George W. Bush, who was the Republican, won all these red states down here and all the way up through here. Now, down in the South here, this is what is typically called the Solid South. Okay, the Solid South, it's a historical terminology that used to be that the Solid South was Democrat. This has now changed. Okay, this changed roughly around the 1950s and 60s into the 70s with the ascension of people like Richard Nixon to the White House. These states started to vote Republican instead of Democrat. Okay, so this is what is considered the Solid South for the Republicans, tends to be more conservative. And then this area in here from places like Arkansas all the way up to Montana, this is what is called the Bible Belt. This is more of your conservative Christian voters. So this tends to be fairly solid red for Republicans as well. The Democrats tend to do well in the more urban areas, so up through New England, places like Chicago and Illinois, Detroit and Michigan. Wisconsin tends to be a little bit more Democratic as Minnesota because of their college populations and their cities. And then, of course, you have the West Coast, which tends to be a little bit more progressive, along with California, Oregon, and Washington. So, again, all these states back in 2000, this is where they were. And this is, again, one of the closest elections we ever had where Gore won these blue states. and Bush won these red states. And weirdly enough, had New Hampshire gone with the rest of New England, you would have had President Gore instead of President Bush. I know I said it came down to Florida, but New Hampshire was also very close as well. So the Electoral College can be very deceptive, and it can be hard to win, even with a solid popular vote win. Now, in 2012, this was when Obama got reelected. It got a little closer because Romney, again, had these solid South states, had the Bible Belt, but Obama managed to swing things like Florida. He managed to swing things like Colorado out here with its 9 votes at that point. He had a much more solid Western, advantage. He, of course, swung New Hampshire as well. So again, these tend to be a little bit more comfortable. This was a comfortable reelection for Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. In fact, if you go back even farther to 2008 and look at the 2008 election cycle, he won even more handily over John McCain. In 2016, this was when Trump won. Okay, Trump won with 306 Electoral College votes. As you can see, he split Maine with Clinton. That was what I was talking about earlier, but he won Nebraska pretty handily straight up. And of course, you'll see some of these states that were previously blue, like Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania all went red. So did Florida. And that's why Donald Trump was able to take the election from Hillary Clinton, is he won the states he had to win. He already had his Bible Belt and his solid South, but he needed to win those states that I just mentioned, the Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, along with Florida. And by doing so, he was able to switch and kind of cancel out all the gains that Obama had made. Okay. Now, in 2020, what did it look like? Well, if you click on 270towin.com, this is always kind of a fun little activity. If you click on 270 to win, it will take you to this website. And on this website, we've referenced this before. It has, notice already 2024, and they have their asterisk. Hey, this is an estimate pending the result of the 2020 census. So they're already starting to look and see what is the Electoral College looking like right now. You will notice that the Democrats always seemingly have 208 Electoral College votes, and the Republicans already have 124. Now, why? It's because those states are so solidly one side or the other that regardless of who is the candidate, they're pretty solidly in the Republican or Democratic hands right now. They're not even close right now. So states like, for example, Montana and Idaho, there are so many Republicans in those states, and it's such a conservative state, there's no chance that a Democrat's going to come in that will sway that and swing it all the way over to the other side. I mean, I don't want to say there's no chance, but it's a very hard chance. And California is just the opposite. California is so progressively, Democratic that the chances of a Republican actually swinging California are very slim. Okay. So these states that are in blue are pretty solidly Democrat. These states in red are pretty solidly Republican, that it doesn't matter who runs. People are going to instinctively vote for that political party, which is another issue entirely when it comes to political parties. But as you can notice from the map here, they're kind of counting on some of these votes switching. You can see Ohio, they already have at 17. They have Florida going up to 31. They actually have California dropping one, okay, dropping a Electoral College point down to 54. They have Texas going up to 41, okay? So some of these states, they're already kind of looking at census data and saying, you know what? The census is trending this direction, and they're kind of counting on New York going up. They're counting on Illinois going down. They're counting on Pennsylvania going down. I mean, all these states might be in flux. So they're kind of looking at where are these votes going to be sliding towards, and what are these states going to be worth? You notice Arizona used to be 11, now it's 12, according to their projections. So they're thinking that this is the general projection of where they will be. Some of these states will lose votes. Some of these states will gain them, which will, of course, switch the strategy as they move into the election season of 2024. Okay, and we'll see if Biden runs for re-election. We don't know. He is an elderly candidate. He's the first, or the oldest, I should say, the oldest candidate to ever win the presidency. He was 77 when he was elected. He's 78 right now. So is there a possibility that he might run when he's 81 years old? We'll see. We'll see what his health is like. We'll see kind of where he's at. We'll see how popular he is. You know, you never know over the course of 4 years how a presidency is going to go. Will Donald Trump try and come back and run again? It's happened before. Grover Cleveland is the only president we've ever had that won, lost, and then won again. So he is your 22nd and 24th president. Donald Trump may try and do that. Now, keep in mind, when Donald Trump makes that decision to run again, if he decides to run again, he would also be 70. He'd be 78 at that time. So he would, if he won, he would be the oldest president we ever elected at that point. He would retake what he already was, because he was the oldest prior to this. So keep in mind, like, if Donald Trump runs again, which he's allowed to do pending the results of this impeachment trial that's going on, if he's the nominee, how are the Republicans going to respond to that? How would this map shift? Would that be advantageous? Would it not? It kind of depends on how the next 4 years go. Now, of course, there are a ton of Republicans that are jockeying for position. There are a ton of Democrats that are kind of hanging in the wings. Obviously, Kamala Harris is the one that, if Biden said, you know what, I'm not running again, the one probably perfectly placed right now would be Harris. But again, what if it's not a very popular presidency? That might hinder her and her attempts to run. We'll see. A lot can happen in 4 years. Okay. So needless to say, they're already kind of jockeying for positions. Now, if you go to 270towin.com, you can, kind of look at the actual election in 2020. This is how the Electoral College map looked. And because this is how the Electoral College map looked, you can see that, the Democrats won, and they are missing one. I would assume it's the state of Maine. They didn't calculate it in. But needless to say, the 2020 actual, 2020 very close, kind of gives you the states that were close. 2020 competitive kind of starts you off with, where they're, beginning, if you will, for 2024. You can play around with the map, and of course you can click on things and say, you know what, I think Texas will go Republican. I think Arizona will swing back Republican. Nevada will stay Democrat. Michigan will go red. Ohio will go red again, let's say. Pennsylvania blue. And of course you calculate this out, and as you go through and color the map in, this gives you an idea of who wins the presidency. And once everything comes down, notice I have a Republican winning 269 to 265. Now, if this stayed the same and there were issues with these small little, like, who wins Maine and who wins the districts, if we get to that point where there are issues in that, who wins the presidency in this scenario? The answer would be no one. It goes to the House of Representatives. This is how key this is, because if just one district said, all right, I'll go Republican, and that Republican hits 270, then they are the next president of the United States. So that's kind of how Electoral College maps work, So if that were be the case, the Republican would win a very close election. And you can play around with this. Sometimes this website helps over, like, my lecture over this. Sometimes playing around with it helps you to understand it a lot better than my words. So if you need to kind of play around with this website to kind of understand how the Electoral College actually functions, you may want to do that, especially for the assignment that comes along with it. If you have any questions over the Electoral College, reach out through email, or of course you can always swing by office hours for Ficker or for myself. Hope everybody's having a great day. Hope you're staying healthy and safe out there, and we'll see you again down the road.